All right, good morning, everybody. Let's give a couple of minutes before we get started. As I see more people are joining the session, just give me a couple of minutes before we can get started. Thank you. All right, let me move these controls over. Once again, good morning, everyone. Hope all of you have been having a good conference so far. I think this is the third day, and we have a lot more sessions coming up today as well. My name is Logesh Balasubramaniam, and I'm a managing director at PeopleSoft Consulting, and welcome all of you to this session on guided self-service, specifically the best practices around implementing guided self-services. Before I get started with the session, I would like to make a quick note that throughout the session, if you have any questions, please do use the chat window on the Pathable app so that post your questions there. I will continue to monitor for questions there and address them. All right. The reason to do that is the questions and answers, whatever being addressed there, would be recorded as part of the session and be available for you to review later as well. All right. With that, let's get started with the session today. Just give me 1 second. I'll move the controls around here. All right. Okay, so for those of you who have just joined, as I said, I'm Logesh Balasubramaniam, and I'm Managing Director at PeopleSoft. Now, I have been consulting, implementing, upgrading, and enhancing PeopleSoft applications for over 18 years now. I started my career with PeopleSoft and continue to lead and manage various PeopleSoft projects. And majority of my experience is in the PeopleSoft HR technology space. And I pride myself to be a solution architect for a PeopleSoft HCM system, work on multiple transformative projects for our customers. All right. So this session today for guided self-service. So if until you're completely new to this topic, you would understand that this particular functionality, guided self-service for managers, has been around in the PeopleSoft HCM application for many years now, at least for maybe 5-6 years now, and it's not a new feature. So why am I talking about this functionality today? Because every year consistently, we work with different organizations, large organizations, that makes use of this framework functionality that is available, not just deploy what is delivered out of the box, but use this framework to deploy more transformative capabilities in their system for their managers to gain significant cost savings. So this is one feature which through the years with our implementations at multiple customer sites, the sites have realized a feature that can immediately offer you significant cost savings. So we will see why, how it works, etc. So the first half of the session is going to be focused on what is available out of the box, what can you do with it, how you go about deploying it. However, the second part of the session, we'll talk about what are some of the best practices, what are some of the limitations, how other customers are doing it based on some case studies, etc. Okay, so that's how we have planned the session today. And as I said, if you joined anytime in the last minute or so, throughout the session, please do post any questions you may have on the Pathable app or chat window. Okay. With that, let me get started. Now, if you're completely new to this topic of guided self-service, many of them may not even know the terminology guided self-service, but might be using it in your system. The terminology of guided self-service is a PeopleSoft term for the framework that powers different manager self-service capability in the PeopleSoft HCM system. So this was introduced primarily for manager self-service, but it's also used for some aspects of employee self-service as well. But what it does is it provides you with a very simple, intuitive, easy to use user interface for your managers to request personal actions, right? Request actions on employees, any employees who report to them on their employment data, right? And that's in crux the foundational aspect of this framework. How it works and what all it can do, what is its capabilities, we will see that throughout the session. Okay. So in your PeopleSoft system, if you have access to a latest demo environment, an easy way to find this functionality is if you go to the Manager Self-Service homepage, there is a type called Update Team Information. And when you click on this Update Team Information tile, it will open up the page, the screenshot that is shown on the right-hand side here, which is there is a list of actions a manager can do that is listed on the left-hand side. And when you click on any of those items, the actual page where they would do those actions comes up on the right-hand side. So it basically has a two-panel layout with a list of actions and the detailed pages to perform those actions. Now, one thing, a very important thing to remember here is with the guided self-service framework, basically it enables managers to request updates to employee data and not necessarily complete the update itself. So one thing that we always, when we talk to customers, when we discuss this feature is HR being circumvented by this process? Do HR know these things are happening? Absolutely not. That's what we are going to talk about. Okay, what is the role of HR? How do you want to define the role of HR in your organization when it comes to these data updates? Okay, so we'll talk about all of that. So first up, I want to talk about what is the business process flow associated here. How does this functionality work, right? So it starts with a manager submitting a request to update a data of either people who are directly reporting to him or indirectly reporting to him or her. Okay. So if you are also, I hope users are familiar with direct and indirect reports in PeopleSoft. So if I am a senior manager or a senior director, leadership role in the organization, then I have few people who will be reporting to me directly, whom I'm manager for, and my direct reports would in turn have people reporting to them, and they would become my indirect reports. So this guided self-service framework allows me as a manager to submit requests for updates to both my direct and indirect reports. Okay. So once they submit the request, once they say, this is what I want the update to be, for example, I want to transfer a person, or I want to update the location of a person, or I want to update the salary of a person. Once they submit this request, it can go through a workflow approval process. Now, the workflow approval process is optional, so you can completely disable the workflow approval process if you don't need it, or it can go through a workflow approval process. Now, the delivered approval process is what we would refer as one level up, meaning whoever is the manager submitting the request, it goes to their manager for approval before it can be actioned. Okay. Now, we have worked with organizations who have built complex approval rules for various requests, even up to 5 levels. I will show you some of the examples here. So, for example, if a person has to move from one department to another department, they go through multiple levels of approval before that can be actioned. So it's entirely up to you how many levels of approvals you want to allow for this particular requests, right? And also another thing to remember is the approval uses the approval workflow engine framework, so it's highly configurable. And also different action requests can have different approval process. So I might want to have an approval process for a department transfer that is different to a salary change, right? So different transaction requests can have different approval processes, okay? Once the approval process is done, or if the approval process is disabled, the request is now ready to be actioned. Now, this is a point where, as an organization, you can decide whether you want to let the request update employees' data with or without HR being without HR reviewing it and approving it, right? So what I mean by that is, if there are certain high volume transactions that happen often and HR just need to be aware of it, they don't have to be a gatekeeper for it. You can let the system update the employee data without HR having to approve it, right? HR having to authorize it. However, if there are transactions that are critical and HR needs to be aware because HR may have to do something else based on that, then you can let HR to be gatekeepers. And once again, you decide what request types should allow auto update and what should not. For example, location change for employees may be something that you may decide to allow. It keeps happening often. You may want to let it pass through and HR just being notified rather than being a gatekeeper and authorizing it. Or a salary change might involve so many other things that need to happen. You may want to let your HR to be authorizing it. So that decision is configured in the system to say, for these request types, we want to allow HR to authorize it. For these request type, I just don't want HR to be authorizing it. I just want HR to be aware of it. Okay, so that's a very critical decision point, right? And then if you design HR to be an authorization role for certain request types, then HR do have an option to review. HR will have to review those requests that come by, and then they can make a decision to say, I authorize this to update the database automatically. So they don't have to key in the request manually. The system automatically updates the database. Or they could say, okay, this needs some special processing. I don't want this to proceed for automatic update. I will do it manually because maybe employee has a future data record, or there might be some special processing that is needed that need to happen before the data is updated. And eventually, either of this decision, the job data and position data gets updated. I want to quickly talk about position data. So the guided self-service framework fully supports all variations of position management, meaning you could be using partial position management, you could be using full position management, or no position management at all, meaning regardless of whichever variations you use of position management, either employee's job data will update it directly or position will update it, which will update the job data. So job and position both are part of the framework. So both will be updated as part of the changes that are getting approved. Okay. So this is how the overall process works from start to finish when it comes to guided self-service. Okay. So I want to quickly break this down and look at the first one step, which is what is the manager's activity here, right? Submitting this request, how that works, because that portion is essentially what is called guided self-service, meaning there is a guided process for managers to submit this request. So from the previous slide, if we just look at the first step, which is submitting a request, then we are looking at how does that work. So essentially, manager first have to, actually I should have put one more step in right in front of selecting an employee, because the first thing the manager selects is they select what action they want to do. So if I go back a couple of slides, yes, you can see here on the left-hand side, there are different actions they can do: requesting a reporting change, promoting an employee, and et cetera, right? So they first need to choose what action they are planning to do, and then select an employee either as a direct reports or an indirect report. Select an employee, and then we can set up the request to have certain questions and answers depending upon what is that they are trying to update. For example, a transfer request may or may not involve a compensation change. So we can ask that question to a manager to say, are you changing the job title? Are you changing the location? Are you changing the department? Are you changing the compensation? You could ask certain questions to determine what they are changing. So that list of questions, what we ask and what are the data fields associated with it, is all configuration driven. So there is an ability to request, set up questions, and set up field visibility based on those questions. So that would be the step number 2 in this process flow. At that stage, we can also provide some additional instructions and documents to manager for them to be aware about what they are doing and what the process associated with it. It is called decision support framework. So where there is a section where you could provide this information. I will show you right after this video. I'm going to show a quick demo video and show you where the decision support information can be made available. And then they then decide what is the data they're trying to change. So let's say if I decided to do a transfer, then am I changing the department, location, job title, what information I'm changing? Does it also involve a compensation change? So I key in as a manager all of the changes, and then I submit that. I go to the next step to review and submit it. On the review and submit page, I can clearly see what information has changed, what documentation I may have to provide, like attachments, and any other comments I may want to add. So all of this information needs to be added before they submit the request. So essentially, I would say it's a 4 to 5 step process. Starts with a manager selecting what they want to do, who they want to update, what is the info they are changing, and what is the supporting information they are providing. They provide all of this and submit this request. This starts the process where, as per our previous slide, goes through the approval process, goes through the HR authorization, and updates the database. Okay, so that's the whole process of how guided self-service is delivered as a framework works. Okay. All right. So what all can be done? What are all delivered out of the box in terms of guided self-service requests, right? So the list is in here. I think it roughly is around 12, 3, 6, 9, 12, actually 14 in here. 14 different request types. However, I think Oracle has addressed most of the common ones that changes when it comes to employment data. As I said, the framework is configurable, so customers are free to create their own request types as well. So I'll show you some examples of what what we have done with other customers to address some of the unique requirements. But these are the delivered data items that are available for changes via this framework. Okay. Now, I have highlighted a few items in here where transfer employee, promote employee, and demote employee. Now, these 3 items, the reason that have been marked specifically is if you are using position management, the other requests like reporting change, location change, full-time, part-time change, those requests would end up updating the position and the employee's job data. So if I want to change the reports to one of my employees, then the position gets updated first, and then the employee data gets updated next, right? Because the reports to is changing in the position. Now, for these 3 transactions that are marked, transfer, promote, and demote alone, the position does not get updated. We are actually moving an employee from one position to another position. So that's something very important to notice, because if you are using position management, your organization may or may not currently following this practice. What I mean by that is, let's say you have a position in one department and you are transferring that person to another department. The right way to do the transfer is to create a new position, or there is a vacant position already there in another department, you move the employee to that position. However, some organizations might actually move the position to the other department, right? So again, the best practice way to do it is the position belongs to the department. It might be approved on that particular department budget. So you keep the original position in that department, and figure out you may need a new position in the other department that may have to go through the position approval process. So you create that new position and then move that person to that position. However, that's how the delivered functionality works. So if you are trying to transfer, promote, or demote an employee, and if you use position management, the system asks you to move that person to that position, new position. right? So the position must exist before you can move that person. However, if you are doing it differently in your organization, that would be an implementation decision to say, do you want to change the business process of how you're doing it, or do you want to change the system behavior of how things are done, right? So those are all would be some of the implementation considerations, okay? So that's the reason these three items are separately called out in this request types, okay? Now, I know I've been talking quite a bit about the process, end-to-end process of guided self-service. I know some of you might be very new to this topic, so I have created a quick video to show the whole process end-to-end. So I'll just play the video and talk through that, okay? So I'm logging into our demo environment using a manager, one of the managers called, I think, John Patterson. And I clicked on this update team information tile. I will pause it here. So on the update team information tile, as you can see here, on the left-hand side, you have a lot of request types that are available for manager to choose. And on the right-hand side, the people who are directly and indirectly reporting to them are listed down. Now, the first request, which is the reporting change, by default is the one that the user lands on. So the manager can see if maybe they're trying to make a reporting change, or in this case, trying to make a location change. And then choose an employee whom they're trying to change the location, Alan Brand in this case. And this initiates the guided process. So in this case, if you notice, the manager has immediately gone into the page where they can see the data that they want to change. In this example, this particular request type location change does not have any questions to be asked. I think the reason being location change is pretty straightforward. And you want to change the location of the person. So there is no further questions to be asked. So the page where the manager needs to enter a change is loaded. You can see there are two key things here. One is the transaction date, which is essentially the effective date of that action. So a manager is requesting a location change. When does the location change should become effective? That's the transaction date. And location. What is the location that they want to put this person in? And if you notice, there is another easy way in this page where on the left-hand side, it is the new information about what you want to change. And on the right-hand side is the current information where the employee is. And for every request type, the layout of these pages are exactly the same. So be it transfer, promotion, you would see the same layout in play. So when the manager changes the location, it also highlights what data field is changed. You can see that orange circle over there. The comments and attachments are both optional. In this case, location change does not have the attachment enabled. That's a configuration. You can easily enable it. Also, the comments is an optional element. And as I said before, when a manager submits it, it initiates the workflow approval process if we have enabled it. In this case, it has been enabled. So it goes to the approver for an approval. And in the demo as delivered, as I said, it's one level up. So it goes to the immediate manager for approval. Immediate manager of the person who is submitting the request. Okay. And on the right-hand side, you can see here, I don't know if you noticed in the previous pages as well, there is this section on the right-hand side that's called as decision support. And this is a section where you could provide links and instructions on any things that the manager need to be aware of when they're requesting a location change. Maybe a location change may involve some tax implications. So have you discussed with your employee about there might be some tax implication due to a location change? So you may provide some additional instructions on that they need to be aware of related to the request they are submitting. Okay. So now I'm exiting out because my activity as a manager is complete. Now I'm logging in as the person who is the approver of this request. In this case, it's Edward who is approving the request that has come through. On the fluid approvals page, there is the location change pending approval for Alan Brand. So the manager clicks it to review the information. They can see what is the information that is changing. The proposed changes says after approval, the employee will be in Charlottetown office, before approval is part of the corporation headquarters. No other information is changing, and I can see the comments. If there were any attachments, I can also see those attachments on this page and can review this information and either deny or approve this request. If a manager denies this request, it basically goes back to the requester, and they need to submit a new request if they want to redo this again. Okay. So I have completed the approval. The approval is done. So I'm going to sign out as a manager. Now I'm going to log in as the HR person who would be actioning this request. And in this case, I have set the request not to auto update, meaning the HR have to authorize it before it updates the database. So when we have that setting enabled, HR becomes the gatekeeper for those requests. So as you can see on this page, they are looking at this location change for Allen brand, the date that it was submitted, what was the effective date that the manager requested, what's the data that is changing, Charlottetown office and corporation headquarters. Location is what is changing. It has been approved by the manager. So you can see all the information and make sure they all look good. And they can put in any comment if there is any information. And at the bottom is where they select. Do they want to let this automatically update the database, or do they want to manually do it, or if they want to reject this for whatever reason, they can say cancel this request as well. So in this option, I'm selecting to auto update because this is the reason why auto update makes a significant improvement, because the user, HR user, doesn't have to manually key in the job data. The system gets updated automatically. It is a one-click action for them, right? So that's where the biggest cost and time saving is. So now they have completed the update, the data is saved, and at the bottom of the page, since this person is not in a position, employee's job data got updated directly. And when they click on it, they can go to the job data summary, and they can see that there is a new job data row for 1010 with the new information. They can click to view the details and confirm that the location change has processed. Now, I'm just showing you this section because this is to make sure you see how the updated information looks. HR doesn't have to verify every single item. They can click up to update the database. If it is successful, it means the database has been updated. Okay. So that's the one example of an end-to-end process flow, how the guided self-service gets started from the manager. Let me stop this. And how it goes to the approval process, then goes to the HR, and HR needs to authorize it to automatically update either position data or job data or both. Okay. I do see a question, and we're roughly midway there. All right, so the question is, the first guided self-service flowchart showed workflow approval and HR review. Can you clarify if those are the same, or can the initial approval be different from the user who does HR review? Yes, so let me clarify. Let me go back. That's a very important question, and I know that's an area where there could be some confusion, right? So as delivered, the workflow approval process is separate from the HR review process. The reason being, workflow approval is typically intended for the approvals that happen within the area before it even reaches HR, right? So the workflow approval is the approval workflow engine, AWE framework-driven approval process. You could have as many approvals as you need in the process before it even goes to HR for review, meaning whatever approvals that need to happen within the area that is requesting the change is typically configured in the workflow area. After the workflow approvals are done, we have a decision point configuration to say, should it go to HR for authorization or should it directly update the database? Most often, every place we have deployed things, it always goes to HR for authorization. Very rarely it goes without HR being a gatekeeper, right? So that's a decision point, and then comes the HR review. Now, HR review as I said, if your decision point is to HR not be an authorization gatekeeper, then this step is completely not needed. However, most often you will need the HR review beforehand, and the HR review is an additional step for HR to be the gatekeeper for this process. They can still reject it. They don't have to approve it, or they can decide to do it manually, or let the system be updated automatically. They have those choices. However, this is not through the AWE framework. This is basically through the page that I just showed you, where they have these 3 buttons, 3 options to choose from. Okay. So it is a separate process, and the reason I specifically have called out review is because I do not want to confuse calling this HR approval, right? This is basically HR authorization, whether this request should go through or not. Now, there have been scenarios where we have added HR also as part of the workflow approval. That could be the last person in the workflow approval, and disable the HR authorization step here so that they approve it and it goes to job data directly. You can do that. However, the reason why HR review is a separate step is the HR review pages that you saw on this video is a lot more detailed, and in some cases they are also editable. So let's say if it's a position clone request, if a user is requesting a new position, they can even edit some of the information here before they authorize it. So the HR review page has a lot more functionality compared to the workflow approval page, which is read-only. Okay. All right. So that's good. So moving along. All right. So whatever we have seen so far is about what is delivered, how it works, right? So the second portion of this session is about how to deploy it, what do you need to be aware of, what are the limitations, what are the extension capabilities, etc. Right? So let's go through them. So when it comes to the deployment process of guided self-service, right? There is a very easy way to go about it, which is what most customers, if you haven't gone about extending the guided self-service framework and looking at it from what cost savings it can offer, if you haven't done those things, then the easiest and the most straightforward way that many customers would have gone about is, let's look at what are these delivered transactions that are available. What is that we want to let managers do? Most often, it is around retirement and termination requests, right? Or salary change requests. We want to allow, we want our managers to do some of these things, 2 or 3 items, and let us just enable that, right? As delivered, we'll make some configuration changes and enable that. That's one way of going about it. I have seen many customers do that, where they just pick and choose what is available as delivered and make it available to the managers. And rest of the things, they might think, okay, our managers are never going to do this, so let's not even worry about that. That's one way of going about it. But where we have seen truly transformative way of deploying this, meaning guided self-service can offer you significant cost and effort savings, cut down manual work, and cut down paper-based forms, is where can you, what all transactions you could offload from HR doing it manually to being driven by guided self-service framework, where you want managers to request it and HR only to be a reviewer and gatekeeper. There have been organizations who have had elaborate paper-based process, manual process, phone requests coming in, who do it, manage the request in different ways, and HR have to do it. Most organizations have email-based process where manager requests something to HR and HR keys in the data, right? That's very common. Those are the areas where this functionality could be truly valuable, right? So the way to go about a deployment of guided self-service is basically reviewing what are all the action reasons that are happening on your job data. So if you look at last year, 2021 or 2022, so far this year, just get a report out of your job data summary and say, this is the volume of job data changes that are happening. Maybe 20% of it is reporting changes, 20% of it location changes, 10% of it is pay rate changes. So you get a list of, this is my high volume job data updates that are happening. And look to see how many of this can be initiated by managers and go through this process, right? Identify what can be moved to self-service. And as you can see in the process, we are not making managers do the update. We are making managers request the update, right? You still have the approval processes. You still have the HR authorization before the actual data gets updated. So you can confidently move that workload of HR in keying in those transactions to a self-service activity initiated by managers. Most important thing, of course, time saving for HR, but also the timeliness of the data coming in. If it is through emails, if it is done outside the system, there is no track record of that information, right? No audits happening. You don't know how many actions are pending updates if it is happening outside the system. You don't know if things are happening timely. We have had customers where one of the main reasons they wanted to do this was a lot of updates employee update happen much later than when they need it, right? Last minute changes, missing updates before the payroll process can be finalized, all those things. Those are all the reasons you want to move it to self-service. So managers can submit it at any time. They have access to self-service. So those are all the reasons to move this workload to self-service, right? So you identify what all items you want managers to request. Almost everything is what I would say. We have had customers who have completely offloaded every item. Once a person is hired, all job data changes typically originates from the area where the employee works. So there is no reason the manager of the person can request those changes, right? So any changes, any job data changes can be moved to the guided self-service. So you then work out what are the requests you want to have, what are the field requirements for that, how do you want to group them. For example, you might be just allowing reporting changes. You might just be allowing location changes. You might just be allowing another data field to be changed. However, there are organizations that group them all together to something like data change, job data change. It could be any of those items. It could be reporting change, it could be location change, it could be full-time, part-time change, all that grouped into one request. The change could be for any data field. So you define what data fields you want to allow, how you want to group it, what should be the approval requirements, what should be the HR responsibility. Are they going to be gatekeepers? Are they going to be just notified? If notified, then what are the notification requirements, etc. Right? And then decide if needs to be any questions, if need to be any supporting documents that need to be made available to the managers, etc. All these steps, first seven steps are all configurations, right? Configurations that you do in the system. However, when you go through this process, you might come across requirements that may require some technical changes. I will show you what those are, what are the common technical changes. And there could be scenarios where you identify those technical changes as well, and then do the configurations, do the technical work, and test, train, and deploy, right? I would say for customers who do not have elaborate custom requirements, the technical changes are very minimal or not needed at all. But there have been customers who have completely replaced either an old system they were using or manual processes they were using with this system, with guided self-service, where they had to have some changes because their old system was doing things in a certain way, or in the manual process they had other functionalities. The form provided more data fields that may have to be added, etc. Right? So there might be needs for technical changes as well. So this would be the process of deploying guided self-service in a transformative way. How to look at completely automating all the updates that happens on employee job data. Okay. All right. So moving to the next one. Now this is an example. I know the screenshot, the font size within the screenshot is very small. However, this slide deck is going to be available. I think it's already available in the session, so feel free to download it. This is a sample of our requirements document. We call it a requirement traceability matrix. A requirements document for guided self-service, and everything that is in blue is like a pre-loaded. Everything that is in gold is a customer input. So when we look at this particular one, this request is for employee termination. So this is the format we use to collect data to set up a request type. Of course, this doesn't have to be the only format. You can have your own formats to collect information, but this is to give you an idea about what is that, what is the information, what kind of info you need to collect to set up a particular request, right? So for employee termination, first thing is a question. Do we need to have any questions? A question can be hidden. That there would need to be at least one question that can be hidden, because a question is tied to the action. The delivered default action for termination is DER. Of course, if you use a different action, that can be set up as well. And then there is an action reason configuration that says what all action reasons should be available for self-service. So not all the action reasons that is available for HR on the job data have to be available for managers. You can limit that list for managers. So you can say, I only want 5 or 6 reasons for termination that managers can choose from. The remaining could be HR use. Okay. So this is, we are collecting that information. There is some supporting information that is added that needs to go into the page. We can choose what data fields should be visible to the managers on this request, what should be editable, of course, for termination. Basically, the last date worked, the transaction date, and the action reason are typically the field to be editable. The remaining, like department location, job title, etc., could all be read-only information. Whether you want attachment to be enabled, whether you want approvals to be enabled, what levels of approvals you need, whether there needs to be any notifications, whether there needs to be any technical changes, right? That needs to be added. Now, one technical change that we have done at most customers is managers can choose any transaction date, like they can choose any effective date in the self-service. However, that may not be always viable, right? You don't want managers to choose a date that was 1 month ago, or you choose a date 1 month in future. So you may want to limit them to certain date ranges, or you may want certain transaction to be always done at the beginning of pay period. So you may want to limit it to pay period begin date or end date and things like that. So these are some of the examples that comes up as technical customizations. Now, when I say technical customization, those are essentially technical validations that gets added to this framework through, it could be event mapping, it could be drop zones, it could be page and field configurator, right? So you don't have to change the delivered code line. You're only making those technical items and as additional items and attaching it to the framework. Okay. So just keep that in mind. All right. So this screenshot is about how we go about collecting that information. Kind of gives you an idea about what sort of information you need to collect if you are doing it internally. And the second item is, what are all the various configuration aspects associated with the guided self-service framework? Now, this is pretty exhaustive list, but for customers who have deployed guided self-service to automate as much of their job data transactions that happen, for almost at every place we would have touched all these areas, right? So that's why I want to make sure there is a comprehensive list for you to use as a checklist, right? So it starts with setting up the GSS transaction itself, what action and action reasons you want to use, text catalogs for questions and instructions, You choose the page and field display, what page, what field you want available for every request. What are the approval requirements, whether you want to allow DB updates directly, whether you want to allow direct and indirect reports to be chosen, or just allow only direct reports. You don't want people, managers to submit requests for their indirect reports. All those are configuration driven. And then all these first set of items are within the guided self-service configuration itself. So there is a page folder where all of this information is maintained. Now, then when you want to use workflow approvals, there is a set of configurations for workflow. Now, one other very important item I want to add here is for delivered request types, right? The 12, 14 items that we saw in the screenshot earlier, all these configurations are delivered out of the box. You don't have to create any of this from scratch. You only have to change it if your requirements are different, right? So for the delivered 14 items, if you want to use them, all of this is delivered pre-configured. Okay, just keep that in mind. So do not have to overwhelm the thinking that all these things need to be built. Okay. So when it comes to approval workflow process, the one level up approval process is available for all request types. Email notifications, email templates, user lists, everything, fluid approval page configurations, delegation framework configurations, all those items come out of the box configured. Okay. And in addition to approval workflow engine, there are common setups like your direct report setup. Most importantly, every customer would have to work with your version of security. So there are delivered roles and permission lists, delivered homepage tiles, navigation collections, etc. But for your deployment, you would have to make sure your organization security homepage tiles include this functionality. So that's a common thing that gets changed or updated at every customer site. And most often, we end up creating queries and reports and analytics as well, because specifically, if you are not letting HR to be the gatekeepers, then you would need queries and reports for them to make it easier to, as a matter of fact, review the information after it has been processed, right? So that's where queries and reports play an important role. And whenever there is a technical requirement, look at the configuration options like page and field configuration, then look at event mapping and drop zones. If none of this is possible, then look at making the technical development that is needed using your application designer and people tools objects. Okay, so that would be the sequence of activities that need to happen to deploy the guided self-service functionality. Okay. Now, we are getting into the very important aspect of this discussion, right? Now, I told you what all guided self-service can do, how to deploy it, what would be the process to go through, etc. In our experience, we have come across various scenarios where the framework does it in a certain way versus customers do it in a certain way, and there are gaps that we need some workarounds and technical solutions, right? The first one is the transfer request. The transfer request as delivered needs to be initiated by the current manager. So, which is logical, right? Because if I have an employee reporting to me and he needs to be transferred to another department or another manager, then I need to initiate it. However, we have come across customers where they want the receiving manager to initiate the request, which obviously is difficult because the receiving manager, before the person reports to them, starts to report to them, they don't have access to the other employees' data. And you can't give them access to other employees' data because they are not in the team. So always it's a chicken and egg thing, and becomes very tedious to work through. A configurable workaround would be to say the sending manager, the current manager, could just do a reports to change, send that person to the other manager, and then the other manager can submit the job data change, maybe job title, department, location, cost center, whatever they want to change. The reporting manager can submit it later. So it becomes a two-step process rather than a single-step process. So again, not every customer has this requirement, but something to be aware of. Okay. The second item to be aware of is all the data changes on job data except for compensation will be in a single row of job data. So to break it down a little bit more technically is there are organizations, let's say if you do a promotion, they will have a row for the job title change and have a row on job data for a compensation change, which is the delivered recommended way of doing things. Your compensation change should always be in a separate row and job data changes should be in a separate row because it gives you the flexibility to easily report the comp changes. So comp rate changes should always be in a separate row compared to your other job data fields changes, which is the recommended way to do it. Now we have come across organizations where they break down the promotion into 3 or 4 rows, right? They might want to do a job title change in one row. If the person is also changing department, they change the department in another row, and they do compensation change in the third row. So they have a requirement to switch to split a job title change versus a department change. Those are hard to get configured using this framework. When I say hard, in some cases it may require technical development because apart from compensation, all the other information on job data like department location, type, job title, etc., reports to, all those changes are grouped into one row when it goes to update job data or position data. Okay, so if your business process is different, then we may have to have some workarounds or figure out a solution that may involve technical changes. The other way is also true, meaning if you are currently doing your promotions and transfers and the comp change in a single job data row, that will also be a gap because the GSS framework always keeps the comp change in a separate row. It doesn't combine it with the other changes. So if you are doing one row and the GSS framework does 2 rows, that will also be a gap. If you are doing more than 2 rows and the framework does it by 2 rows, that will also be a gap. Okay, so just keep those things in mind in terms of these would be the gaps that might come out when you go about implementing guided self-service. Okay, that covers those 2 points. The guided self-service framework does not update your existing future data job rows. So if the person you are, let's say if I'm as a manager, I'm submitting a location change for an employee in November, and that person has a pay rate change in December already loaded as a future dated entry, the framework will add my location change row in November as requested. It won't automatically update the future dated pay rate change row with the new location. Okay, framework doesn't do that. Framework doesn't go ahead and update the future dated row with the changes you are making. Okay, it only adds a row for the date that you are requesting. So the workaround there is in the HR authorization page, we have added functionality to tell the HR that this person has a future dated row. You may have to manually review and update it so that HR can manage the change. Again, not a huge issue, depending upon how often you have future data changes and how often you get a change that overlaps with the future data change. Very small percentages, but just be aware those are the things that need to be taken care of. Another thing that we always, 2 things that we always get at every customer site as a concern is when a manager is submitting a request, they cannot save the request midway and do it later. It's only a 2 or 3 step process where they select a person, they say what they want to change and submit it. There is no ability to save it midway and come back and do it later. If they have to come back and do it later, they just cancel, come back and do it whenever they're ready. Okay, so it's not like a request, save, do it later, etc. Okay, the another one aspect is when a manager or anyone in the approval process rejects a request, that request is done, it's been rejected. A manager cannot resubmit it. A manager has to create and submit a new request. Same reason, it is guided self-service is considered to be a very simple process. If just like how they cannot save it, whenever there is a need to submit it, it's much easier to submit a new request than finding something that was canceled or denied and then editing and submitting it, because the data field that changes itself for a couple of data fields. If something was denied, they can always go ahead and submit a new request. Okay. I don't know why it was not done in a way that you can resubmit a denied request. However, the framework doesn't do it. Okay. And minor things to work around, but not a showstopper. Okay. All right. So I think we're getting into the last 5 minutes. I want to quickly go through some of the common technical requirements, also show some screenshots of how some of the other customers have done it as well. So where we see some common needs for technical requirements, limiting transaction dates to pay period begin dates or end dates, or within the last month, cannot be more than certain dates, all those validations that may go through. We have had customers require hyperlinks to be added to the ability to have hyperlinks in the question section so they can click it to view some policy documents, etc. Making comments and attachment mandatory. Comments and attachments can be enabled or disabled, but they are always optional. They are not mandatory. We have had requests where comments and attachments need to be made mandatory. There isn't a read-only page for the requesting manager to see the request. I would say a user-friendly read-only page is not available. So we have there are options to work around that. I will show you some examples. Where a requesting manager can go back later and look at, like, 6 months ago, I submitted a request. Can I see this request, what I submitted? There isn't a page that is delivered that was visible to managers. So we made a delivered page that was hidden, did some alterations to make it to be the page for one customer where they can see this information. Okay. Always different search fields are being available for administrators to find and easily find and filter information. Again, when we talk about configurable search framework, those things would help here. We have had requests where HR should be able to search by position number, HR should be able to search by the requester name and things like that, which are simple technical items to be enabled for administrators. Obviously, custom approval workflow routing rules, we have done it at almost every single customer site where we have implemented it. And there are around 10 or 12 job data fields that are open for managers to submit a change. There are fields that are not available for managers to submit a change. However, there are customers who have requested some additional fields on job data to be made available in the GSS framework so that managers can request change. I think a good example is cost center of the employee, like an earnings code distribution of the employee, things like that, where, I think even union code could be a field that we want managers to request a change. So there have been additional fields, custom fields that have been added like that to the framework. Now, up next is some quick snapshots of how these things have been done. One other important thing, guided self-service provide an option for managers to clone a position that is already in their team to request new position. They cannot request a new position without cloning a position. They should have some position in the team they can select and clone and request it to be a new position. If they don't have anyone reporting to them, obviously, then they technically don't even have access to guided self-service. However, they can't just say, I want to create a new position from a blank paper, right? Nothing without cloning it. However, we have provided some workarounds for customers to address that. These are some of the examples where I said hyperlinks have been added to the questionnaire section where managers can easily click and see information, relabeling the transactions. This customer specifically had the view transaction page. I'll show you an example of that. The second screenshot is the transaction date field has been made up as a lookup field. So manager can only choose from a lookup options available to them. They can't randomly choose any dates. In this lookup for this customer, we only enabled pay period begin dates as the field they can choose from. So that's one customization that we have come across. This is the view transaction page where one of the delivered pages that were hidden for managers were made available with some minor changes. They can see all the requests that they have submitted and search and find and view the information. This is a customer who had significantly enhanced guided self-service with many custom transactions. They had new question requests, they had higher requests, they request additional pay changes, paid sabbatical, things like that. So they had completely custom transactions to go with. They also had very elaborate approval requirements, like in this example, 4-step approval requirements with supervisors, budget managers, vice presidents, and HR department approval. So completely custom workflow approval processes as well. All right, I have hit right on time, and I think one more last slide to show. So this is a snapshot of the entire request, which is completely custom, meaning they had multiple new fields to be added, like they wanted cost center information, additional pay information, additional fields added to the guided self-service framework. But the overall process flow remains the same. Manager requests, approves, goes to the approval process, goes to the HR for processing, etc. It's just custom additional fields added. Okay. So that was my last slide, and you have my contact details, and I'm already a minute over time. Feel free to post any questions onto the Pathable app. I don't see any questions so far, so which is good. But continue to post it if you have any questions, and glad you found the information useful today. And I hope you found the information useful today, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions. With that, I will stop sharing and also stop recording. Thank you very much for everyone to join today, and also hope all of you have a good rest of the conference.